doesn't exist in Quran. It simply doesn't exist. I will tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Islam that Muslims are around the world. It may sound so surprising and shocking, but the fact is that the Islam that we see today was in fact created after the 9th century. And it slowly grew from various rituals and rules which were created and sponsored by the so-called caliphs, Umayyad caliphs and Abbasid caliphs. And none of them called themselves caliphs until the Abbasids started their reign. Islam that we see today, in fact, doesn't exist in the first 300 years of Islam. Quran almost talks about no ritual. It doesn't talk about rituals. Although some scholars will tell you out of the 6,666 verses in the Quran, and even the counting of the verses, they vary. But nevertheless, of the 6,666 verses, only a few hundred allegedly talk about rituals. But I will seriously disagree there. That's why you will see that whenever you will show verses from the Quran where it says, Allah is saying Quran is complete, comprehensive, straightforward, and the followers should also talk, they should talk straightforward as well. They will tell you, the Muslims will tell you that they can't follow Islam without the hadiths. And again, if you go to the hadiths, even then, the hadiths will not be sufficient to follow the Islam that we see today. So we are in a big catch-22 situation. Quran, for example, in Surah 18, verse 1, Surah 12, verse 1, Surah 33, verse 70, and several other places, Surah 4, verse 140, I can go on. In several places, if you read those verses and several other verses carefully, where Allah is saying, don't follow anything as revelation from God other than the book I have given you. And it talks about a book that you can keep in between your hands. But where is the book? We know from Islamic sources and from even Bukhari hadiths that Zayd ibn Thabit, who was trusted with collecting the Quranic verses so that Uthman could turn it into a mushaf, said that you are giving me a responsibility which we were not used to, or we did not carry out during the lifetime of the Prophet. Allegedly, there was no book during the lifetime of the Prophet, but Quran talks about book which you can keep in between your hands, and Quran talks about Quran being revealed, Allah's verses being revealed with the help of a pen. And they will tell you that the Quranic verses were being written down by various scribes. So there was no endeavor to turn it into a mushaf during the time of Prophet. Quite astounding. But nevertheless, all the rituals that you see today, no basis in Quran. All confusing, utterly confusing. If you want to justify those rituals, you will find them utterly confusing. And the and justification of finding their sources in Quran are problematic. For example, there is not a single verse in the entire Quran to tell you that you should go to Mecca, of today's, say, Saudi Arabia. You should go to Mecca and perform the pilgrimage. There's not a single verse in the entire Quran. When Quran contains the word Mecca just once, 48:24, and it talks about the valley of Mecca. From, there was a war situation and etc. The Muslims got the upper hand and etc. But they will try to justify Mecca with Mecca, but even that description doesn't match. There's not a single verse in the Quran which says that Kaaba, which appeared only twice in the Quran, Surah 5 verse 95, Surah 5 verse 97. Apart from that, the word Kaaba didn't appear anywhere else. They will try to justify Baitul Atiq of Ibrahim to Kaaba, which can't be justified, in fact, because it will not. See, if you do a serious neutral research, you can't justify Baitul Atiq or Bait to be Kaaba. You can't do that. So there is hypocrisy everywhere to justify the Kaaba of today to be the Bait of Ibrahim. Nevertheless, there's not a single verse in the entire Quran even to say where the bite is and you should go round it. You could circumambulate it. You will find a verse where it says Baital Lataf. Even that is problematic. If you go into the manuscripts, even that is problem, because Baital is the black stone of the Aphrodite worship, and to go around it was a ritual in times before or even the initial part of Prophet's appearance or Prophet's lifetime. And you can find proofs to that in Bukhari hadith as well. So we have problem there. There are problems of Mushaf in the Quran as well, and no way to deny it. Mushaf. For example, you will find Surah 37 verse 130. You will see words like Ala, Al, Yasin. And if you read the same surah, verse 37, 123, and if you read carefully, Surah 37, verse 130, Allah and the next word is Al, and they try to turn Al into one word, Al Yasin, to make it Ilyasin or Ilyas, which is not grammatically correct, because Al, the word, doesn't have any meaning apart from the family of Yasin. So, because there was no harka in the Quran, when if you go to the classical copies, there was no harka or Zair, Zabur, Pesh, they were not there. So there is treachery there, just to obliterate the family of Prophet from Quran. You need to match that with Surah 33 verse 33. Treachery everywhere. And if you want to rely on hadiths to justify, we have problems as well. There's not a single verse in the Quran which talks about Eid, but you will find Eid in hadiths. There's not a single word which say that you should celebrate Eid twice a year. Forget about sacrificing animals around the world on Eid al-Adha. There are verses to say that you should sacrifice when you are going to the house of Ibrahim, if you can find it. The word is sabil, if you can find it, if you find the way. It doesn't say if you have the financial ability, physical ability, then you should go and have the pilgrim. It doesn't say that. So we have problem there as well. And the place of sacrifice is Masjid al-Haram, not anywhere else. Masjid al-Haram. If you're deterred, that is, you are forcibly deterred not to go there or from going there, then you can sacrifice in some other places. But to celebrate Eid and sacrifice animals is not there, my friend. Then again, Laylatul Qadr, the night of revelation, is also unclear, because you can't really calculate Laylatul Qadr. You can't calculate. And there are totally contradictory hadith descriptions. Some will put it at the end of the third leg of Ramadan month. And then again, some will say, Prophet said to search for it in the first odd nights of Ramadan month. And then again, they'll try to talk about Laylatul Qadr Khairun min alf shahr. Which night is that? Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr, the night of luck. But it doesn't talk about the Quran specifically being bestowed on that night. They try to justify anzalna, the word, into the first verses of the Quran. Even that is problematic. So it is unclear. The only thing the Quran is clear about that you should believe in one God and must remember you are accountable to Him. You should follow your heart. Try to look around you, look inside you, like in Surah Rahman and then Surah 45, and bring faith of existence of an eternal power. So you must do good deeds and follow several means to seek God. Everything else are all man-made. In the name of hadith, in the name of seerah, in the name of this, in the name of that. Where do you want to go for a source for Muslims that they follow Islam today? Hadith? There's not a single complete manuscript of Bukhari until the 12th century. And even the oldest manuscript of Bukhari is in the British Library. So there is not a single copy of Bukhari until the 12th century. The most revered hadith collector. It's not there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't simply exist. And there's not a handwritten copy or even a page from Bukhari. And allegedly Bukhari had dictated twice to a man called Farabri. We don't know much about Farabri. And Farabri then dictated it to someone else, a kid, 17-year-old kid, 67 years after he had allegedly heard the Bukhari collection from Bukhari. We don't know much about scholarism of that Farabri guy, or even about the guy who heard it from Farabri at a teenage. Bukhari is full of contradictions, absolutely full of contradictions. There is no proof even Bukhari wrote Bukhari. Then you talk about Sirah. Oh boy, that's even worse, because the earliest Sirah allegedly was written by Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq, whose grandfather was a Christian monk and probably was too scared and had converted to Islam because Khalid ibn Walid had attacked the city where Ibn Ishaq's grandfather was a monk. Then his uncles and father, everybody were preaching Qabr. Qabr is, sayings of old times, or storytellers of old times, and Quran specifically prohibits such activities. But nevertheless, Ibn Ishaq was sponsored by Al-Mansur, the Abbasid Caliph, and Al-Mansur had engaged Ibn Ishaq. And Ibn Ishaq, in his initial, in his early life, he was sponsored by Umayyad caliphs, who were all killers of Ahlul Bayt, that means family members of the Prophet. Ibn Ishaq was seriously criticized by the greatest imams of Islamic history, including Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ibn Abu Hanifa, Zafar al-Sadiq. They all vehemently criticized Ibn Ishaq. And we don't even have Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq had dictated to many of his students. It went to Ibn Hisham after almost a couple of 100 years, and Ibn Hisham was so disgusted about the writings of Ibn Ishaq, he even threw out many of Ibn Ishaq. So we don't have much about, we don't have any proof that Ibn Ishaq of today even was written by Ibn Ishaq. Big problem. When was Prophet born? Big problem. Most of the scholars will tell you 12th Rabiul Awal. Even that is questionable, because not all the Muslim scholars agree with this. The earliest that you can find to Rabiul Awal is again Ibn Ishaq. Where did Ibn Ishaq get it from? No proof. Where did the Prophet die? No mention. Was he ever in Medina? You can't say that, because the word Madinain or Medina was used in case of several prophets. Yusuf, Moses. I mean, prophets after prophets when Allah was talking about the city they were in, the term Medina was used. Medina in Medina. So there is no way to prove that even Prophet was in Medina. There is not a single early Islamic source until the 3rd century. Nowhere it says that Muhammad Prophet died in Medina. He died in the house of Aisha. Where is Aisha's house? Or you can say there is examples, there are traces of Aisha's house in Medina. Well, no, anybody can build that later on. So there's not a documented claim. Nobody claimed that Prophet died in Medina. There's not a single verse in the entire Quran to say that Prophet was even born in Mecca. He was even persecuted in Mecca. Rather, if you read Surah 16, you'll get an impression of if you read the descriptions of the areas being talked about, the descriptions do not match with Mecca. Simply, the descriptions do not match. So there's not a single verse that Prophet was even born in Mecca or even driven out of Mecca. It's not there. So we have problem there as well. Then the most revered hadith narrator was Aisha, Prophet's wife. But what does the Quran actually say about Aisha? Quran condemns Aisha as even a non-Muslim who was tormenting the Prophet. There's not a single verse in the Quran which says that Aisha was very religious, Aisha was devout Muslim, and she was this, she was that, she was loving the Prophet. Nowhere. Rather, if you read Surah 33 and if you read Surah 66, especially Surah 66 verse 5, you will see Allah was extremely unhappy with the behavior Aisha and Hafsa were engaged in. The behavior, if you really be honest and read Surah 66 verse 5, you will feel that Allah is warning Aisha and Hafsa that if you don't change your ways, Allah will bring Allah will ask the Prophet to divorce you and get wives who would be devout, Muslima, Mumina, that means devout Muslim. They will be Muslim, not only Muslim, Muslima, and they will also be devout Muslim, Mumina, and they could be virgin or they could be divorcee, doesn't matter. So what does it mean? If somebody, if a father tells you you're being tormented by your wife, I should rather find a better wife for you who will be a Christian. What does it mean? That the present wife is not a Christian, right? So why can't we say the same thing when it comes to Surah 66 verse 5? Allah is suggesting that Prophet's wife could be replaced and the new wife should be Muslim, and not only, they could be devout Muslim. So they can't say Allah is talking about devout Muslim here. No. Allah is talking about Muslim and they could be even devout. So Aisha and Hafsa, there were no chance they were Muslims even. But the earliest Mushaf allegedly written by, again, Abu Bakr was entrusted with Hafsa. And Aisha was warned not to go out into the public because that were not the duties of the Prophet. But what did Aisha do? Aisha went to battle against Ali. So she was very much engaged in public affairs. She even went to war against Ali and created the first fitna and eventually gave courage to Muawiyah to keep on slaughtering the family members of the Prophet. So we have one of the highest numbers of hadiths narrated by Aisha. How can you accept it? Then Aisha's hadiths were collected at the instructions of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik and Umar too, who were all, the whole Umayyads were all killers of the family members of the Prophet. How come otherwise we don't see hadiths from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet? Why not? Problem there as well. Then we have hadiths from Muawiyah. And if you read Surah Ma'un, chapter Ma'un, if you be honest and read the earliest historians' concepts and ideas about who that hypocrite the Surah Maun is talking about, you will see they are referring to Abu Sufyan, the father of Muawiyah. So Allah was warning them to be hypocrites. Then Muawiyah was the man who initiated the slaughtering, beheading of other Muslims. So that's why he paved the way of today's Islamic State that you see. They were killers, brutal regime. And they initiated the first recorded history of Muslims being slaughtered by fellow Muslims. Then you're talking about other greatest hadith narrator, Abu Huraira, father of cat. But we don't even know the real name, actual name of Abu Huraira. There are 15 different Abu Huraira. 15 different names of Abu Huraira, the father of kitten. 15 different names. Think about it. We don't even know his name. And he was allegedly with the Prophet for 3 years, who hardly took part in any battle, who was illiterate, and Caliph Umar even whipped him, allegedly. But nevertheless, a man who doesn't have any evidence of scholarism became the teacher of hadith collectors. The very first hadith collection endeavor was by Munabeh. He was Munabeh's teacher. And Munabeh, whose father was from Zoroastrian, mother was from Jewish origin, we see his collection to be full of, I'm talking about Munabeh's collection full of influence from the Judaic Zoroastrian stories. So Abu Huraira, who came at the fag end of Prophet's life, was hardly for 2-3 years with him, and narrated the highest number of hadiths. And of the 3 years, he were somewhere else, working as a muaddin. Then we talk about other syndicate members of Bukhari. The same goes. The same goes, my friend. Read about the greatest, so-called greatest narrators. Have you read their history? They talk about the chains. Have you really investigated the character of the so-called greatest narrators of the hadith? Imran ibn Hashim, even he was psychotic. What are we dealing with here? There's not a single, description, clear description, unequivocal description how to offer 5 times prayer. In the hadith even, forget about Quran. Even the hadith is not clear, explicit, how to offer 5 times prayer. And what kind of ritual is that? They're dictating you to count God's name so many times that God will be happy. In certain, you should have to say certain words, and you are calling that conversation with God. Quran doesn't say all these things. And the character that is portrayed in the hadiths, in the seerah, under the auspices of the brutal caliphs, goes totally against the persona that we see in the Quran. There's not a single verse in the Quran where it says the Prophet took up swords against anyone. Rather it says you're not their controller, you're not their ruler. Surah 88 verse 22. And he was too shy even to tell of his wives. He was too shy even to tell of his own followers, not to approach his private quarters when, for too long, or not even to go there. He was too shy even to say that. But he's rather portrayed as a brutal warmonger, rapist in Bukhari hadith and others. So we have a problem, my friend. We have a problem. Look at all the rituals, the counting of this, counting of that, odd number reliance and all that. You don't have, because on the other hand, Quran says that Allah created us in prayer, in pairs. So it's even numbers. But it talks about emphasis on odd numbers. Then, seerah is not reliable for many reasons. It doesn't even exist even. There's only a small bit of a paragraph of Muwatta, one of the earliest hadiths of allegedly by hadith scholar in the first 300 years of Islam. Only a quarter of a paragraph. Even that is in British Library. In Vienna. That is in Vienna. What are we dealing with here? Even Muwatta, the great hadith collection, had 30 different versions of it. What are we relying on? No Medina, no Makkah, no Hajj, no confirmed way how to pray. You have to rely on so-called imams. Who were they? Were the gods? So if you question the collection reliability, then they will tell you are not a Muslim. They will tell you are not a Muslim. But Quran doesn't say that. Quran does not say that. So you have to be a Muslim according to the definition of certain imams. You have to be Muslim because if you worship Prophet. But there is no such dictation. All the prophets are to be treated equally. And belief in one God. Prophets will come, prophets were gone. Surah 3 verse 144 says that. But Muslims of today have turned Muhammad into a demigod. That's the fact of it. Otherwise, what's the point in wearing a beard in a certain way and it has connection with devotion to Allah? How is that? How is that? Quran doesn't say anything about beard. And they made listen to music haram. Where is that? Where is the Quran? There's not a single verse in the Quran which deals with music. Others says don't buy words which are, say, garbage, wasteful, or talks against Allah. That's it. Then the sermons being delivered of the so-called clergy of today, they should not be heard. So there's not a single copy of the entire Quran even, of the first 300 years of Islam. We have 45%. And there are serious problems with Mushaf. There are serious problems. I mean, Hadith, forget it. Forget it, my friend. Forget it. You can't establish Hadith. You cannot. Simply you cannot. Hadith you cannot establish, rituals you cannot establish, not a single ritual you can establish. There's not a single verse in the Quran to say you should bow towards the black stone or even to the Kaaba. And now they're kissing the black stone every time they go to Hajj. When Allah says in Quran very clearly in Surah Baqarah, Surah verse 22 to 24, you read it, that the stones and the humans will be fuels in the hellfire. But they're kissing the stone. Because of what? Because of the vital Aphrodite black stone, reminiscence of kuffar times. Going around 7 times, wearing white robes during Hajj. Where did you get all this? Where did you get this? And hadiths are full of rituals, do this, count that, count this. You are just suffocating our lives. Whereas the Quran doesn't say this. Quran says, then you will say, is it that easy? I will say, yes, it is that easy, because the Quran talks about Siratul Mustaqim, easy way. Easy way. Zakah, even you will not find it how to pay Zakah. Zakah is tazakah, from tazakah. There's a mushaf problem here. Tazakah is good deeds. How do you pay Zakah? It is not there even. They will justify Zakah to be Sadaqah. But Sadaqah is different. Sadaqah you can pay round the year. But Zakah was turned into a yearly thing so that the caliphs could suck your blood in taxation system. I'm telling you the truth, which nobody will tell you. Nobody will dare tell you. That's the fact. Nobody will dare tell you. Because I have done forensic study, analysis of Islam, historiographical analysis, which Muslims of today, the so-called scholars of today, are too afraid to talk about. But that's the reality of it. Believe in one God, be accountable to Him, follow the great people of your time, and seek means to reach the pleasure, to have the